Well, good afternoon and welcome. My name is Colonel Art Athens. I have the honor of serving as the director of the Stockdale Center for Ethical Leadership here at the Naval Academy. And on behalf of the center, I'd like to welcome you to the Volgenau Honor, Courage, and Commitment Seminar Luncheon. Our mission at the Stockdale Center is to empower leaders to make courageous ethical decisions. That's what we're about. And we feel this particular venue is an important part of accomplishing that particular mission. We designed this seminar with a couple of things in mind. The first was to have a speaker who could speak about leadership, but not the speakers we often bring in who have necessarily a military background. We've had journalists at this luncheon, we've had authors at this luncheon, we've had CEOs at this luncheon, and we try to bring in variety to look at this aspect of honor, courage, commitment. Second, we keep it small so that not only do we get to hear a speaker, but we have a chance to interact with that speaker. So many of the lectures here at the Naval Academy are pretty large-sized, and this one is a more intimate setting. The third thing is we're trying to draw together midshipmen, staff, faculty, and coaches in the same place to actually engage in some discussion. There are people here who have direct support to the midshipmen that you see in Bancroft Hall. There are a number of people here who do amazing things for the Academy but are not as visible. And part of what we're trying to do is to bring them to this type of event so that there can be a discussion amongst all of us. And lastly, we hope to inspire each one of you as you go out, and that it would improve your leadership, whatever your area of leadership responsibility is, but to do it a little bit better and to work towards being that extraordinary leader. This seminar series is made possible through the generous donation of Dr. and Mrs. Ernst Volgenau. Dr. Volgenau is a 1955 graduate of the Naval Academy, a career Air Force officer, and the founder and chairman of SRA International, a public information technology firm with over 7,000 employees headquartered in Fairfax, Virginia. SRA solves complex problems of global significance in the national security, civil government, and global health fields. We are very grateful for Dr. and Mrs. Volgenau and their support for this program. I would now like to invite Chaplain Phillips if he would come and give thanks for our meal.
Thank you, Colonel.
Good to see you.
As we turn to our individual sources of strength and honor, of life and love, let the spirit of gratitude unite all those at these tables for what we are about to receive, for this food to nourish us in our bodies, our minds, and our souls, for the gift of wisdom and inspiration that we will receive from our speaker to enable us, to strengthen us, to inspire us, to lead lives of honor, courage, and commitment, and for the challenge that St. Ignatius of Loyola posed to us, to give and not to count the cost, to fight and not to heed the wounds, to toil and not to seek for rest, to labor and not to ask for any reward, save that we are doing thy will. Now, in his words, go forth and set the world on fire. So say we all, amen.
Thank you, Chaplain. Well, thank you, Chaplain, and please enjoy your lunch. I'll get back up in a little bit to introduce our speaker, but you have the salad and bread in front of you, and the main course will be served, and then Mr. Lowney will come up and we'll get to engage with him. So please, bon appetit. I'm going to break the fellowship part for just a second so I can introduce the guest speaker and then have him speak, and then we'll have more of a chance to talk again at the end. Our guest speaker, Chris Lowney, is formerly a Jesuit seminarian, and he was named a managing director of J.P. Morgan and Company while still in his 30s, and held senior positions in New York, Tokyo, Singapore, and London until leaving the firm in 2001. After his career with J.P. Morgan, Chris wrote and published the book Heroic Leadership, that addresses how the Jesuits' 4 leadership pillars enabled him to lead successfully in the financial services industry while maintaining his values and integrity. The book became a bestseller, received a number of awards, and has been translated into 10 languages. The Marine Corps has developed a strong interest in heroic leadership and distributed the book to a number of senior Marine leaders. Mr. Lowney has written 2 other books and works extensively in the nonprofit sector in both health services and education. He is a summa cum laude graduate of Fordham University in New York, where he received both his bachelor's and master's degrees. Heroic Leadership, I must tell you, is a book that I've read, and it's a book that I've reviewed every year, because Mr. Lowney has captured the essential tenets of leadership in that book that I think we can all learn from. His work has had a major impact on both my life and the way I approach leadership. We are honored to have Mr. Lowney with us this afternoon. Please join me in giving him a very warm welcome.
Thank you, Colonel Athens, for that kind introduction. And let me say to all of you, I do a fair number of talks. Every once in a while it's an obligation, but rarely is it a complete privilege. For me, this is a great privilege to talk to a group like this. And I'm going to talk for about 25 minutes. But before I start, I want to suggest that we do a little mental experiment, and then I'm going to invite you to talk to each other for maybe 2 or 3 minutes. So first, let's please quietly, each person think of the names of 1 or 2 living people that you would consider to be leaders. Now, I wonder why you think of that name, or I wonder why you think of those names. So let's take a few more seconds, and let's each think about the qualities or attributes or behaviors that we would associate with leading well. Let's quietly think about that. Now I want to invite you, just for about 3 minutes, to go around the table, and why don't you mention the names and ideas you came up with. And 3 minutes is not a lot of time for tables these size, so nobody gives their dissertation about leadership. You know, it's just what's on the top of your head. Okay, so talk to each other. I'll give you about 3 minutes, and then I'm going to start talking. Okay? Okay, let's pull ourselves together. I suspect most tables didn't have the chance to finish completely, but it's a nice chat to continue afterward. So who are our leaders? People came up with great names, I'm sure. I wonder who thought of their own name. I guess nobody, or next to nobody, or if you did happen to think your own name, probably you didn't turn to the table and say me, you know? We are raised in a culture that teaches us to be modest people, and modesty is a beautiful virtue, and there wasn't enough modesty in any organization that I ever worked with or for in my career. But for the next 20 minutes or so, I want to at least raise the idea that maybe when it comes to a topic like leadership, your modesty might be somewhat misplaced, because sometimes it could be connected to a broken stereotype that associates leadership only with being in charge, with status. So stereotypically, often when we think about leaders, we think about president, chief executive, general, and so on. And that stereotype, that leadership is only about that, is not the solution to anybody's problems. In business, politics, civic life, in fact, it is part of the problem. And in some respects, the first people we need to think about as leaders are ourselves, and I will explain why. And what do good leaders do to motivate the people around them? That was part 2 of the experiment, and I know people came up with great ideas. I suspect in a room like this, words like honor or courage or commitment might have come up once or twice. I wonder if anybody thought of this idea enunciated by someone with wonderful leadership credentials. He said this, quote, "You must love those you lead before you can be an effective leader." The person I just quoted was General Eric Shinseki, whom you would well know was a Chief of Staff of the U.S. Army before his current role. I've never been in the service, and the first time I heard that quote, it struck me as a little strange, coming from a military class that typically we associate with being tough. Or maybe not out of place, because the more I thought about it, the more I suspect that generals are making better choices if they love the people they must place into difficulty. And I also suspect that soldiers are performing better if they believe they're valued in some very deep way by the people given the horrible job of sending them out possibly to face their death. So who is a leader and how are leaders leading? The message I want to send is we're all leading, well or poorly, all the time. And our claim to leadership is not our status, the position, the rank we hold. Rather, our claim to leadership is what we do with our status, with our platform, and the kind of values that we're willing to role model in our life and in our work. Now, that idea certainly runs against stereotype. In other words, it's not the knee-jerk way we think about leadership, but this is not like a gimmick or something I make up. If you look in a dictionary, among the definitions you would always find of leadership would be something like this, quote, to point out a way, direction, or goal and influence others toward it. And isn't it true that everybody here is doing these words all the time? We're pointing out a way by virtue of how hard we work, what we study, how we treat other people around us, what we do with our time and money. A lot of people here are parents. Could there be any more obvious example of pointing out a way and influencing others than what parents do for their children over a lifetime? So by the dictionary definition, not some gimmick of mine, good parenting is good leadership. But though most of us, though all of us are leading, most of us are doing so only self-consciously. In other words, we don't walk around thinking, oh, I'm a leader and blah, blah, blah. And in order to get better at it, as with anything in life, one of the first things we need to do is get a little more explicit. In other words, accept the fact that I have an opportunity, I have a responsibility here, and figure out what we want to do with that opportunity, that responsibility, in whatever role I have right now. Now, I want to develop 3 or 4 ideas, values about leadership, not the only ones, not the best ones, not the formula, nothing like that, but some values that come primarily from 2 parts of my own background. As you heard from Colonel Athens, after high school, I was a Jesuit seminarian, so I was studying to be a priest for about half a dozen years, and then I ended up working at J.P. Morgan for 17 years. And you know, what most struck me in the end, what more struck me than the completely obvious difference in mission between religious orders and investment banks were at a general level underlying similarities, because isn't it true that in every human organization, humans have to accomplish many of the same tasks? We need to motivate ourselves and other people. We need to set goals and reach them. We have ideas, and we have to persuade other people around them. And it struck me that, that good leadership is good leadership in whatever kind of environments people are operating. And it also struck me that among the qualities people who are leading well often manifest would be these 4: to be heroic, and to be self-aware, and to be ingenious, and to be loving. I'm going to define each of those 4, and then I'm going to talk at least about 3, maybe all 4 of them, we'll see. So first, some sense of heroism. You know, the people who are leading well have some real desire to excel, some passion for excellence and ambition, and importantly, they work for goals that are bigger than any one person's ego. And secondly, self-awareness. You know, in order to lead well, you need to know yourself. What are your strengths and weaknesses? What are your values? What's your outlook on the world? And ingenuity, the world is going to keep changing. And only people who are able to keep adapting to a changing world are leading well. And finally, love, that we treat other people in a way that respects their dignity and tries to unlock their human potential. Okay, now let's backtrack over these ideas. Let me start with heroism. We're here under the sponsorship of a center named for a true hero. Admiral Stockdale's name would be on everybody's list of heroes, right? But I want to invite us to reflect on a paradox that, you know, one of the experiences that we associate with his heroism, his captivity, was something that he certainly could not predict or control or choose in his life. And isn't that, in fact, the way life is for most of us? You know, it's rare that we choose the opportunities life gives us. The only thing, on the other hand, that we typically do control, that we always control, is how we behave and how we think and how we react in front of whatever opportunities life is going to deal us. And let's be frank, for most of us, the opportunities that life gives us are small. And our heroism is not going to be something that we're going to win in a spectacular moment that everybody's going to watch on television. Rather, it's going to be the fruit of a lifetime of very patient, difficult work. We're here at a university, right? And think of teachers here. Teachers have no guarantee that they would ever make a profound impact in anybody's life. A teacher's heroism is showing up every day and living and working as if he or she might make this kind of an impact. Another quality of teachers, another quality of heroes, of people in service, is that they appreciate that they're working for something that's beyond themselves. They're part of a larger institution. Remember, Stockdale formulated the code of conduct for his fellow prisoners that got with the acronym BAC US, right? And its contents are not really relevant for the short time we have here. But listen at one point to the way he described the purpose of that code. He said, quote, what it really meant was that each of us had to work at the lowest common denominator, never negotiating for himself, but only for all. This idea that it's about something bigger than me, not about me. There's an anecdote in the early 1960s, remember from history, Russia and the United States, they're racing to get a rocket to the moon first, right? And the story goes that President Kennedy has a tour of the space agency, I guess to boost morale. You know, at a certain moment he runs into a janitor, a guy who's cleaning up an office, and to be polite, he says, so what's your job here? And the guy says to him, Mr. President, I'm putting a man on the moon. Okay, I'm from New York City. We don't want any part of this team spirit stuff, you know? It's all about us. But even I know, and everyone here knows, that the teams that perform best, whether it's the teams that are going to Notre Dame this weekend, or the Navy, or my old J.P. Morgan and the Jesuits, are teams where people get over themselves and appreciate this is not all about me, it's not all about my position, it's not all about my role. Rather, I'm willing to invest some part of my ego and energy into a goal that's bigger than me or any one of us, and that's how organizations excel. Now, that sounds like a patriotic, even spiritual idea. It is. But it's also a very bottom line business idea. A few of you may know of a guy, John Cotter, who taught at Harvard Business School. And he did an interesting piece of research once with a partner where they took some very strong performing companies, some solid financial companies and some lousy companies. And they went into each group and did interviews to try to figure out, is there something different about the way people think and behave in good and bad companies? And of course, when they go into the bad companies, they're not saying, hey, look, we're trying to understand why you guys are so lousy and could you help us figure out? And so they do interviews and they make a number of observations, and here's one of them. That in strong companies, individuals habitually tend to be thinking about someone else. So look, this is my team. I need to make these people as productive as possible so that they can really do good work. Or this is my customer and I need to give this guy a terrific product that's really going to suit his needs. And in crummy companies, they find exactly the opposite, you know, that habitually people tend to be thinking about themselves. So it's not, how can I give this guy a terrific product that really suits his needs, but rather, can I screw one more dollar of profit for me? You know, and in terms of the people who work for me, it's not, how do I make them productive? Rather, how do I use these people like tools so that I can look better and get ahead? So in every sort of field, we get this sort of insight that one of the qualities of people who are leading well is that they have this instinct that it's not about me, it's about something beyond me, bigger than me. And getting this insight is a self-awareness job. So now let me talk about self-awareness for a few minutes. Anybody who has managed a lot of people or worked in a human resources department has been surprised by this phenomenon of rising stars who all of a sudden blow up. So when I worked at Morgan, you know, we hire a lot of very smart people out of university. They all want to come to Wall Street and get rich, and you know, they all do very well when the only thing we asked them to do was move numbers around Excel spreadsheets. And invariably, some portion of them blew up as soon as we started to ask them to do grown-up things. You know, like dealing with other human beings, or dealing with problems that don't have easy solutions. And one of the problems you quickly realize in life, and I'm sure you realize in your profession all the time, is that most problems don't have easy solutions, and many problems have no solutions, in fact. And you need people who have first a judgment. In other words, to understand, well, all right, I seem to have 3 alternatives, and I can't prove this one is correct in the way I know 1 and 1 equals 2, but I have reasons. So I make a choice with judgment, and then I have courage. You know, I can't prove this is correct, but this is the way we're going to go, and I'm going to take the risk of looking stupid or failing. And you may know that there's one school of thought that attributes these spectacular flameouts, the inability to develop judgment and courage, to a lack of self-awareness. In other words, what sometimes happens is that very smart people, sorry, now I'm talking exactly about the kind of people who come to a place like this, is that very smart people figure out how to do school, but never figure out how to do life. In other words, they become very adept at dealing in narrow, safe environments that are about digesting information and giving it back, and they like that, and they're comfortable there. And they never really get exposed to a lot of challenge or difficulty or failure that helps them to develop what in the corporate world we used to call learning agility. In other words, the ability to learn from your own mistakes, the ability to accept feedback from other people, the ability to fall down and to keep going. There is a psychologist who worked at Harvard for many years who worked with a lot of corporate chief executives on a one-on-one basis. And he made this very interesting observation that a disproportionate share of these characters were, in his words, twice born. Very interesting phrase. He didn't mean it in the religious sense we might infer. Rather, he meant this, that he noticed how many of these people early in their adulthoods had suffered some kind of a crisis. You're an alcoholic, you go bankrupt, your family breaks up, whatever. And this situation totally knocks him down. It makes him say, look, who the heck am I and what do I want out of my life? And his thesis was that it was exactly that kind of crisis that explained their ultimate success, because it gave them in the end a very strong sense of who they were and what they wanted their life to be about. Again, let's go back to Stockdale. Listen to this quote from the admiral talking about his time in captivity in retrospect. Quote, "I never lost faith in the end of the story. I never doubted not only that I would get out, but also that I would prevail in the end and turn the experience into the defining event of my life, which, in retrospect, I would not trade." In some respects, that's an absurd comment. How could anybody say that about that experience? But in the context that I just developed, we understand somebody saying that. You know, this idea that difficulty, challenge can help us mold us who we are. And I guess the takeaway I want to draw about self-awareness for a group like this is that if life doesn't thrust on us through a crisis, some moment of self-scrutiny, we need to create processes for ourselves to figure out, look, who am I and what do I want my life to be about? And as I understand it, one lens we could put on your curriculum is it's a way of manufacturing a process, whether it's through leadership classes or classes in history and literature where people are reflecting on what human beings have said they're about, or sea trials or other kinds of situations where the midshipmen are being forced to put in situations of challenge and being forced to unravel them for themselves. Okay. So heroism and self-awareness. Let me talk for a few minutes about the idea of ingenuity and love, and then we'll have a chat. So ingenuity, you know, the idea that the world is going to keep changing and we need to be able to keep adapting if we're going to do well. I think those in a marine environment might use an idea like adapt and overcome. I think, isn't that one of your maxims, right? And what I want to focus on is maybe what kind of enables us to be these kind of people. There's a meditation we studied in seminary, and it goes like this. Okay, imagine that you inherit an enormous amount of money. What should you do with it? All right, well, this is in seminary, so you say, all right, well, I guess the right answer was you give all the money to poor people and you rejoice. And maybe that's the best thing we could actually do with excess money. But it was the wrong answer in the meditation. The point of the meditation was this, that when you have a major decision in life, the first thing we need to do is make ourselves free. Free to pursue any legitimate course of action. And only when I'm free am I in a position to make a good choice, and then I make a choice according to whatever is my aim or objective in life. Now, that sounds a little abstract, so let me sort of concretize it for us. Anybody who has been involved in mergers and acquisition, a business kind of situation, has seen these kind of situations that I promise you happen multiple times every year. We're thinking about a potential merger between two companies that would be great. It would be good for the customers, good for the shareholders, and everything seems to make a lot of sense. And now we're at the point where we have to figure out, all right, once these companies are combined, who's going to run the company? And my sister here is chief executive of one of the candidates, one of the companies, and my brother here is chief executive of the other company. And neither of these clowns will accept the fact that in a merged company, one of you must agree to be number two. So in the language, the technology of this meditation, we would say that each of these people is so attached to his or her ego or status or the way of doing things in the past or fear of failure or fear of new things or whatever it may be, that people get so attached sometimes that they're unable to make themselves free enough to do what has to be done. Once again, I find this same wisdom in the Admiral. Here's another quote from him. He talks about how he managed to survive and improvise in captivity. Quote, "I had become a man detached, not aloof, but detached, able to throw out the book without the slightest hesitation when it no longer matched the external circumstances." In other words, this idea that ultimately we have to be free from whatever could hold us back in order to be free for whatever is the mission, whatever we have to accomplish, whatever is our highest goal. Okay, so self-awareness, heroism, and ingenuity, and now we just spend a few minutes on the idea that, you know, certainly in a business situation, often people would be the most skeptical. What place could love have in a big company, okay? And I promise you, I didn't walk around J.P. Morgan hugging people and telling them I love them. And I don't want to suggest you start doing that here around the campus, replacing salutes with hugs. But anyway, the founder of the Jesuit said that love ought to manifest itself in deeds, not in words. So what kind of deeds could show the impact of love in a workplace? Why don't we start with business, which is the most counterintuitive, and then we move along to our situations here. You know, how about this for starters? Surely no chief executive who loved his or her employees would have recklessly gambled their pensions and their livelihoods in order to prop up his stock option value through fraud, like these morons at Enron. I think there's a very legitimate example. You know, the best teams that I was ever on at J.P. Morgan were teams where we trusted each other, where we were more interested in helping each other win than watch each other fail. We didn't stab each other in the back. And we held each other very accountable to high standards that made each person and the whole team better performing. Now, I think we could look at a bundle of behaviors like this and say that this is one of the ways that love could manifest itself in any team setting, in one of your companies, in a workplace. If part of the motivation for why we treat each other this way is that we appreciate that there's something different between human beings and tools like hammers and saws. That human beings are uniquely dignified and we need to treat them a certain way just because they're human. You midshipmen, I know, are all divided into companies, right? And I worked in a company, J.P. Morgan, and we ought to reflect a little bit on what is a company. Those who study Latin or know a Romance language know what a company is, right? Company is two words. It's the word for with or together, cum in Latin, con in Spanish, and the word for bread, pan in Spanish, panis in Latin. So what is a company? Etymologically, your company is this sense of a group of people with whom you break bread. In other words, a group of people that sort of gives you energy,